Hey there, storytellers. Rick Lewis here with all my stories, and I'm going to tell you two stories today. One story is going to be short and boring, and the other is going to be longer and hopefully more engaging. And what I'm attempting to do here is demonstrate the difference between a story that is missing four key storytelling principles and what the same story looks like when these elements are included. So here's the first story. So I have three kids, and when they were growing up, we had a lot of power struggles like all parents and kids do. There tends to be headbutting and you disagree over things, and then you get into disagreements and power struggles. And we went through this quite a bit. With all three kids, I went through this, and then more with me, so that I was more mindful when they were young and their teachers. They are a little there, but yes, power struggles can be a thing around parenting. Okay, so there you go. I don't know how long that was. That was like, I don't know. Oh, yeah, so like a minute, a 1 minute story, which is devoid of the four principles I now want to introduce you to. And here are the four principles. When you tell a story, try to include a setting, characters, a conflict, and a resolution. Very simple. And the reason we want to land on those four elements is because each of those elements corresponds to what we are neurologically wired to do as humans. We want to visualize things, we empathize, we dramatize, and we organize. So when you set a scene, a tangible, specific scene for people to be able to picture in their minds, you engage them right away. You engage them more deeply than you would if you're being general and vague. Secondly, when you introduce characters that are human and feel real to the listener, they can empathize with those characters, which creates a connection between you and the listener. Third, when you introduce a tangible conflict, a specific tangible conflict, our brains light up because in the midst of conflict, the brain says, hey, you need to pay attention here because conflict indicates a potential threat and you need to learn something. You need to find out what happens here. You need to know what to do in the future. And that leads us to the fourth part, which is the resolution of the story. And that lines up to our neurological penchant for organizing, taking all of these things we've perceived visually, how we've connected and empathized with people, and the conflict that we were tracking, and then organizing the outcomes and all that data so we learn from what happened. Now, here's the same story told again, but from the framework of the four elements. So I was sitting at home in the kitchen table. My son stomped in while I was having breakfast. He was cursing because he was late for school. He'd not managed his time well. I was immediately tense because I knew he was about to ask me for a ride to school, and I was feeling resentful that because he hadn't managed his time, I was now going to have to take him to school. We got in the car. It should have been a beautiful, wonderful feel to the day. The sun was shining. It was spring, but we're both out of sorts. We get in the car and immediately we start this dance that we always used to do when we got in the car, which is my son likes to listen to music and he likes to listen to it loud. So when we get in the car, he puts on the radio station and he turns up the volume past the point that he knows I'm comfortable with. I usually wait a few seconds and I reach over and I nudge it down a little bit. And then he'll wait a minute, often until I'm making a left-hand turn and I'm not looking at the radio, and he'll nudge it back up. And like this, we go back and forth. So we're now about halfway to getting him to school. My son turns the volume up and he's kind of looking at me. It's sort of like, okay, what are you going to do now, Dad? And what I did is I turned the volume up to full. Now, suddenly we're sitting there in the car, and if it were a cartoon we were watching, and you were looking at the car from the outside, you would have seen it changing shape based on the pulse of the bass beat pounding against the inner walls of the car. And my son just looks over at me like, what planet am I on? And then he got this big smile on his face and he just starts rocking out to the music in the passenger seat. And as we pull up to school and we're in a lineup of other cars and parents are in front of me and behind me and outside of the car walking by. And now I'm that guy whose music is so loud it can be heard at a distance through the closed windows of my car. And I'm just having to deal with however that looks, like whatever judgment or criticisms might be coming my way from other people. And the message that that conveyed to my kid, the feeling between us, it was a turning point in our relationship because it indicated to him that I was more concerned about our connection than I was in being right and rigid about how exactly I wanted the music to be in the car. And that is my story. And as you can see, it included a setting, the characters, and a very tangible conflict and what the resolution was. So I hope that helps you get a sense of how you can transform your own storytelling and make it much more engaging and interesting to a listener just by including these 4 parts in your storytelling.